Okay, so now we're going to be going over our Form A outside pre-trip inspection. We're going to be starting at the top of the truck. On our left and our right side, we have our marker lights. These indicate the height, width, and length of the truck. The three lights in the middle, those are your ID lights. Those indicate that this is a commercial vehicle. Going down to your windshield, making sure it's not cracked and broken, free of any illegal stickers, and clean at all times. The weather seal around the windshield is not ripped, torn, or missing to prevent any air or water from coming into the cab. The windshield wipers are not cracked, broken, or legally welded, tied secure with the proper set of nuts and bolts. The wiper blades are not worn, torn, or missing, and free of any debris to prevent any scratches to the windshield. Coming down to the headlights, I would use the low beams for the city and the high beams for the country. I have my turn signals on my left and right side as well, and they are also used as emergency four-way flashers. I'm making sure that the lenses on my headlights and on my marker and ID lights are nice and clean, not cracked, broken, or missing, and I'll be checking for any burnt out bulbs. For my lights, I should have amber in the front for the color of caution and red in the back. I'm going to be checking under my vehicle as well for any hoses, any leaks, anything hanging that could cause a hazard. And I'll also be making sure that's not leaning to the left or to the right, which could indicate a suspension problem, or I may have a flat tire. Today we're going to be starting off with our Form A passenger side. I'm going to start off with the coolant reservoir, make sure it's not cracked or broken, tied secure with full set of nuts and bolts, and I'll be checking for any leaks. I'm also making sure the fluid is at the proper level. My caps are on tied secure, not cracked, broken, or missing. The hose coming out of my reservoir is tied secure at each end, free of any cuts, scratches, or bulges, and I'll be checking for any leaks. Going on to my water pump, making sure it's not dent, cracked, broken, or illegally welded. Tied secure with full set of nuts and bolts, and I'll be checking for any leaks on the ground. My water pump is a belt-driven component. Going on, I'm going to give a general overview of all my hoses, making sure it's tied secure at each end, free of any cuts, cracks, or bulges, and I'll be checking for any leaks and listening for any leaks. Starting on my Form A passenger side pre-trip inspection, I'm going to be starting with my alternator, making sure it's tied secure with its full set of nuts and bolts, not dent, cracked, broken, or illegally welded. My alternator is a belt-driven component. I'll also be checking my wires to make sure there's no bare wire showing that could cause a short. I'm also going to be checking my belt, making sure it's not worn, torn, or missing. Not too tight, not too loose. Too tight could ruin the bearings to my components. Too loose could slip off and not work properly. Should have no more than 3/4 of an inch play in between the two pulleys. Going on to my oil intake and my oil dipstick. This is where I'll be checking my oil level. To check the level, I'll take the dipstick out, wipe it clean, dip it back in, check for the proper level. If I needed to add any oil, I would add it through the intake. I'm making sure both of my caps are tied secure, not cracked, broken, or missing, and I'll be checking for any leaks on the ground. Going on to my power steering reservoir, making sure it's tied secure with full set of nuts and bolts, it's not cracked or broken, and I'll be checking for any leaks. Making sure my caps are on, tied secure, not cracked, broken, or missing. To check the level, I'll take out my dipstick, wipe it clean, reinsert, check for the proper level. If I need to add any, I'd add it through the cap. If I follow the hose going down my power steering reservoir, it takes me to my power steering pump, just there in the bottom. Making sure it's tied secure with the full set of nuts and bolts, not dent, cracked, broken, or illegally welded, and I'll be checking for any leaks on the ground. Above it, I have my air compressor, making sure it's tied secure with its full set of nuts and bolts, not dent, cracked, broken, or illegally welded, and I'll be listening for any air leaks. My power steering pump and my air compressor are both gear-driven components. Going back to my power steering pump, I'm making sure I'm checking the hoses, making sure they're tied secure at each end, free of any cuts, cracks, or bulges, and I'll be checking for any leaks on the ground. Going on to my steering column, making sure it's nice and straight, not dent, cracked, broken, or illegally welded, and I should have no more than 2 inches of play while turning on it. I'm going to check the U-joints, making sure they're tied secure with the proper set of nuts and bolts, not dent, cracked, broken, or illegally welded, and well lubricated. Going down, I have my steer box, making sure it's tight and secure with the full set of nuts and bolts, not dent, crack, broken, or illegally welded. And I'll be checking for any leaks on the ground. If my gearbox were to be leaking, it will need to be replaced before I continue my trip. Going on to my steering linkage. Consists of my pitman arm, my drag link, my swing arm, and my tie rod ends down there on the bottom. Making sure all my parts are tight and secure with the full set of castle nuts and not dent, crack, broken, or illegally welded. And making sure my joints are well lubricated. I'm also making sure my castle nuts have their proper cotter pins in the lock position. Going on to my suspension. Here I have my spring mount, making sure it's tight and secure with the full set of nuts and bolts. It's not dent, crack, broken, or illegally welded. Going on to my leaf springs, making sure I have a full set, not dent, crack, broken, or illegally welded. Tight and secure with the proper set of nuts and bolts. I have my shock absorber, making sure it's tight and secure with the full set of nuts and bolts, not dent, crack, broken, or illegally welded. And I'll be checking for any leaks. If it were to be leaking, it'll need to be replaced before I continue my trip. Going on to my mounting pad, making sure it's in the proper position. It's not dent, crack, broken, or illegally welded. The U-bolts going around my mounting pad are tight and secure with the proper set of nuts and bolts. And with the proper set of nuts, not dent, crack, broken, or illegally welded. My rubber stopper is not missing to prevent any metal-to-metal contact. Going on to my brakes. My brake chamber, making sure it's tight and secure with the full set of nuts and bolts, not dent, crack, broken, or illegally welded. And I'm listening for any air leaks. The clamp going around my brake chamber is tight and secure with the full set of nuts and bolts, not dent, crack, broken, or illegally welded. The air lines leading to my brake chamber are tight and secure at each end, free of any cuts, cracks, or bulges, and I'll be listening for any air leaks. This truck is equipped with disc brakes, so I have no push rod or slack adjuster. I have my rotor, my caliper, and my brake pads. I'm making sure my rotor and caliper are tight and secure with the full set of nuts and bolts, not dent, crack, broken, or illegally welded. Also, my brake pads and brake shoes should have no less than a 1/4 inch of life left. I'm also going to be checking for any fluid leaks. If there were to be any fluids leaking, that would indicate that the inner axle seal has busted and needs to be replaced. I'm also going to be checking for white powder and black powder, which indicates, white powder indicates that the brakes overheated and a fire extinguisher was used. Black powder indicates metal-to-metal rubbing. Going on to my tires. Here in the front, these are called my steers. Checking the walls of my tires, making sure if we have any cuts, cracks, or bulges. And I'll be checking the thread for any nails or screws that could cause a flat. Here in the front, recaps are not permitted. My thread life should be no less than 4/32 of an inch. Air pressure should be between 85 to 100 psi unless specified differently by the manufacturer. Going on to my rim, making sure it's not dent, crack, broken, or illegally welded. Tight and secure with a full set of lug nuts. Making sure I have a full set of my lug nuts. I'm also checking for any rust or metal shavings. If any rust or metal shavings are showing, it means that they are loose and need to be tightened or replaced. Going on to my hub, making sure it's tight and secure with a full set of nuts and bolts, not dent, crack, broken, or illegally welded. And I'll be checking for any leaks. To check the fluid on my hub, I'll take my cap off, dip my finger in, check for the proper level. If I needed to add any, I'd add it to the same cap hole. Going on to my valve stem, making sure if we have any contact with the rim, not dent, crack, broken, or illegally welded. And I'll be listening for any air leaks. This is where I'll be checking my air pressure with my personal air gauge.